Fresno was a desert. You know, we're a big agricultural area now because it's been so developed, but originally Fresno was basically a desert. So it gets very hot here. It's not the most fun place to live in the summertime. Baldassare Forestiere excavated about 20 acres underground. So he did this for 40 years. He had figured something out here that was a really smart way to live. So that's what this first area was really about, was the motivation of getting out of the heat. It wasn't until later on that he started to get this inspiration of, this is actually a really good way to live, and I can grow my trees down here, and I can create this amazing home for myself down here.
Oh, you can turn into here, perfect. So there's some above ground and some underground, I guess. Probably people who have passed this, you really don't know there's anything here. Well,
They have no idea. They have no idea what it is.
There's lots of openings. These
Yes.
are all underground, acres and acres of hidden bedrooms.
Yes. Yeah, they're just different rooms, passageways, courtyards. So I mean, all types of rooms. I mean, we can see right over here, that's that first tree coming down the stairs. This one's right above the water well. So it just, it keeps going. The one where you see right here with all the trees coming out, that's the courtyard that has the carob and the loquats. You can see that growing there. The courtyard with the bathtub. I mean, it's a whole other world down there. I kind of like that it's a hidden gem and that you have to want to find it And, you know, here it is existing right off of a major highway, and yeah, people often just drive right past it. This area specifically is known as Highway City because it's right off of our major Highway 99. So you can see it's really developed into a lot, you know, gas stations, liquor stores, tire places, and then there's us.
This area is hot, it's dry.
It is, yes, very, very hot. Over 100 degrees Fahrenheit almost every day in the summertime. So it gets very intense with the heat. Yeah, which is actually what inspired Baldassare Forestiere to create this place, was to get out of that heat.
Okay, so he bought land.
Yes, so he came to Fresno from Sicily in the early 1900s with the idea that he wanted to grow citrus here. He grew up around citrus. His father taught him how to grow citrus, and Fresno was such a booming agricultural area at the time. So he came to Fresno to buy that land, thinking he had got this amazing deal, but it turned out that the land was filled with a sedimentary rock called hardpan, and you cannot grow citrus in that. And he had never heard of hardpan before, so this really came as a shock to him that he had spent all of his money on a piece of land that was basically useless to him.
So can you see it? I mean, is it, what was it, is this?
Well, no, this is actually the topsoil, which is why he wasn't aware that that's what he was getting. There were several inches of this good topsoil, so he thought he had this great piece of land. This was an up-and-coming area for farmers, so he was very excited. The hardpan was a surprise, and it's a few inches beneath the topsoil. So when he first started creating it, these stairs right here, it was actually a ramp that he would use to push wheelbarrows of earth up to ground level. He made it into stairs later on. So what this started as is just a way to get out of the heat. Because once he realized that he was not going to be able to grow citrus on his own land, he had to start hiring himself out as a laborer. And so he's working all day in the hot sun, mostly digging ditches for irrigation canals. So he's miserable. He wants a cool place to come home to. And so he started thinking back to Sicily and how wine cellars were so common there. So that's what it started as, is just a single cellar where he could move his bed underground and cool off.
So this was all by hand?
All by hand. Pickaxes, shovels, wheelbarrows, and his own strength. He was doing it himself. So he's working all day as a farm laborer, and then he's coming home and working on this in the evening. And he does that for about 20 years. By the time he's around 40 years old, though, he's actually producing enough fruit on his land that he's able to sell it and make his living that way. And the reason he's able to get to that point is because he was able to successfully figure out how to grow his fruit trees underground. So this room, we're actually surrounded by the hardpan itself. We have it in its natural form, but also where he's broken it out into bricks essentially, and use that to reinforce the walls. So he's not going out and buying stones or buying bricks, he's just using that hardpan that his land was made from. This is the natural hardpan, this kind of reddish color.
It's not clay.
No, it's not clay.
Yeah.
And so here you can see where he's broken it out into stones and then set it back up again.
But that's hardpan that becomes stone. It's so hard.
Yes, yes.
It's that hard. Okay.
Yes, I have heard that it's the third hardest sedimentary rock in the world. So it's actually very common in Fresno. Most Fresnans have some hardpan in their backyards, but they usually have a few inches of it, and most people use dynamite to get past it. He had 3 to 5 feet of hardpan. So in the beginning, it must have seemed just endless. But eventually, after digging through it, he did find, okay, there is an end to it at some point, and that's when he discovered that he could make these rooms down here. A lot of it was experimenting. He's getting past that 3 to 5 feet of hardpan. He's finding a soil that he thinks could be nutrient rich for the trees. So he starts out just by planting. This is actually one of the first trees that he planted in the early 1900s. He starts out by just making a planter for it, putting a skylight in because of course the tree needs sun, and seeing if it will grow. And a lot of his early trees, you can see him experimenting with the sizes and the shapes of the skylight because he wanted to see how much sun he needed to let in that they could thrive, but he also doesn't want to take away from this cool earth environment that he's created for himself. And it seems to be a really great environment for the trees because most citrus trees in this area have a lifespan of about 50 years, and ours are over 100. But they're protected from what a lot of the citrus trees in the area deal with, which is the frost and the intense heat.
Exactly, you feel that right away when you are down here.
10 to 15 degree drop.
And that's
It's
not only-
significant.
it's not only for humans, but for plants too, right?
Exactly. Yes, it's very comfortable for them. Yeah, I mean, you can see these oranges. I mean, this is coming from a tree that was planted in 1906. You can see this is the natural hardpan, and then he would take the pickaxe and he would break it into these chunks, and then he would use it. And in the beginning, using as little cement as possible to secure them, because once again, this man does not have a lot of money. He tries to just put a little bit to keep them together there.
Well, he certainly knew what he was doing.
You can definitely see the inspiration from his upbringing. You were asking about collapses before. You can see everything has these arches. Growing up in Sicily, he would have seen that style of architecture and knew that that would last for hundreds of years. So,
like bulbs from Romans on.
Exactly. You can see that inspiration from the catacombs. We know he did spend some time in Rome in his early 20s before coming to the United States. So he's definitely drawing upon that. But really a lot of this is trial and error and him figuring out how to do it because he was not formally educated as an architect or an engineer.
So architecturally, he knew what he was doing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So this actually is where after he decided he was going to put this tree in here, he moved in here.
So this was his like second bedroom.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Oh wow.
So you can see even more so that he's wanting to cool off even more, so you make it more enclosed. He's put a couple of benches in here for himself. And over here we have his first kitchen underground. So this was the pipe for his wood-burning stove. He would have had an ice box right under here. So very simple, but it was all he needed. It was just to get out of that heat.
Can you imagine how long it would have taken with hand tools to dig all?
Well, this area right here, he did pretty quickly, actually. It seems like an overwhelming task, but the goal was to get out of the heat in the summer of 1906. And that's when he started, was July of 1906. And by the end of that year, this area was already created.
Was that a particularly hot year or just his first?
It was. It was his first summer here, but it also was a record-breaking heat.
Do you know how hot it was?
115, I believe. So he was just miserable in it and decided he was going to go underground. The skylight is interesting. You'll notice it's more cone-shaped to put the Venturi effect into place because you have the kitchen with the wood-burning stove. This is a hotter room. So to keep it cooler, we're putting that Venturi effect there.
And Venturi effect is when it's funneling. Is it a funneling effect? So it
Yes.
has to be a narrow, what do you have to do?
Yeah, so it has to be more narrow at the top. So it sucks the hot air out and it pushes the cool air down. So you can really feel the breeze even in this area. He really had an amazing mind to think of what problems he was going to deal with and finding ways to solve them.
So he probably wasn't using any sophisticated word to word it, but this was like bioclimatism or all these fancy things we're talking about these days, right?
A man very much ahead of his time. So I showed you his early home. In the 1930s, he moved into this home, which we consider his upgraded living quarters, his new digs. And you can really see at this point, in the 1930s, he's been working down here for 20 plus years. So he's really making a comfortable home for himself. So this is his dining room.
Look at that table.
That
wow.
table's
It actually doubles as a planter. So he actually had a dwarf orange tree growing out of the center. So it's decorative, but also you have fresh fruit right there at your table.
So he kept digging, and as if he found a room he liked, and he thought, well, this would make it a good dining room.
Yes.
Like maybe he just kept going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think he would take a lot of what he'd be inspired by and then create with that. And, you know, for a creative person, it provides a lot of freedom once he became comfortable with the medium that he was working with. You know, he'd get to an area and be like, let's turn this into this. We have the kitchen over here. So this is where he moved his ice box and the wood burning stove. He brought a radio in at this point. He did like listening to the radio.
So he has some conventional furniture down here, right?
He does start to get conventional furniture, yes. He had his wood burning stove.
Okay.
He had his ice box. And we just saw his dining room, but he also had, I like to think of it as a breakfast nook. You know, he just has his little table here, a bench next to it. So if he wanted to sit down and have his breakfast right there, nice and easy, straight from the stove to the table. He's setting up areas for, you know, the pantry, sacks of flour or potatoes, more shelving in here. So you can see it definitely is an upgraded kitchen from that first one we saw, much more spacious.
Right. Wow. And all connected. I mean, you see it
Yes.
going.
Yes.
Just
It's a bit of a maze. It is all connected in some way. It's easy to get turned around in it.
And there's always light coming down. Like
Yes.
You see that even here, there's always
There's always natural light.
always. Like, because
Well, he wasn't looking to live in a cave. You know, he still wanted that bright, airy environment, which is why for a while there were stories of him being this mole man living underground. As you can see, this is not a mole man environment. He was not living in a cave. He was just creating a unique home underground. But he clearly liked his light and airy spaces, I think.
this keeps going.
Do you want to see his bedrooms?
Yeah, let's. Bedrooms.
That-
He lived alone, but he has more than one bedroom?
He does, yes, for the different times of year. So this is the summer bedroom. So we have this nice big window, so he would be able to have a breeze come in here. And even stepping in here right now, it's noticeably cooler than where we just were. Where you're going into now is his winter bedroom, which you can see it's much more enclosed. He learned that hardpan can work as a natural insulator. So he actually put a small fireplace in this room, and he would be able to close off this area and stay warm. So I think this is one of the few areas that you would actually describe as more cave-like, but that's because he's thinking of the winter time. And it does get fairly cold down here in the winter. We have more damp winters, not snow, but a fogginess to the air, a dampness in the air. So I think this is where he was really looking at closing himself in, lighting a fire, and still being comfortable in here.
How was he able to have a fireplace? I don't see a flue.
It's in the wall. And in fact, it is back to back with another fireplace in the room on the other side of this. They share a flue.
So there was no danger of smoke.
It was ventilated.
Okay.
Now, once again, maybe he had some trial and error with that, but as we've seen, he's a pretty brilliant man.
And what's this?
So this is one of his peak holes. So I mentioned before, Baldassare did not have a fence surrounding the property. And there were a lot of people that were very curious about what he was creating. And very often Baldassare would like to know who was here before he went out to see them. So just like today, so many of us have our little camera on our doorbell, he would set up peek holes. So if he heard someone walking around, he could just take a look and see who was coming in. And they're very often pointed down because they're actually pointed at people's feet. We have to think farming community in the 1930s, 1940s, most people living in this area were probably pretty identifiable by their shoes. And so this one specifically was aimed at what he considered his front door.
Let's see if I can find the other side of that.
So it's actually in here.
Oh.
Right there.
Oh, there it is. Okay. This was a waterway or something?
So this was his fish pond, because the challenge with fish is keeping them fresh, right? And he's working with an ice box. So, you know, keeping fish for a little while might be a little challenging. So instead, he'd bring them back here after fishing. He would keep them alive until he was ready to eat them and just catch them out of his pond.
Gosh, you have the whole world down here.
Yes. And this is also where he would take his baths. So that is his bathtub here. It's a nice spot for a bath.
Yeah. To carve the shelter for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is the carob tree. So that was common in the part of Sicily that he was from, in Falari. They had lots of carob trees. And then we also have loquat trees out here. So I think since this is his living quarters, he's thinking of those fruits that maybe he grew up with as a child, but he is not finding in this area too much, so he's bringing those in. I also like to think of these as kind of snack food trees because they all produce very small fruits that are easy to have a handful of them and just pop them in your mouth. So, you know, a little snacking area.
It's really nice. I love it. It's just like it has a little view as well.
Yes. You have a beautiful view everywhere. And in here, he even started to incorporate even more of a creative side of his. There are paintings on the walls in here. And these are similar to trees from the part of Sicily where he grew up. And at one time, this went all the way across the bed. It's unfortunately has fallen away over the years, but underneath it, we can see his pick marks where he carved away at this wall. So how he would create each room really depended on the actual stone that he was hitting at the time. So there were some areas that he's building up with the stonework of the hardpan, but other areas he would find a really tough spot of hardpan and he just decided, you know what, this is secure on its own, I'm just going to shape it.
Right, so he knew that. He had some sort of instinctual knowledge, or he had no training as a technical architect or something?
None at all. We actually think he had about a 4th grade formal education. So all of this is him learning as he goes, teaching himself how to do this. So yes, I think there was just something in him that he was a brilliant man that was able to figure out how to do this. And I'm sure he, you know, made a lot of mistakes along the way to get there, but he kept going and he figured out the best way to create it.
It was probably super satisfactory to just create this whole rich world that is super livable out of just nothing. I mean,
Yes.
dirt, basically.
Exactly, especially once he figured out how to do it. I mean, there must have been so much freedom in being able to realize I have this skill, I can develop this skill, I can make whatever kind of home I want to. That's really an amazing feeling to feel like the sky's the limit here.
Is all this hardpan?
This is all hardpan, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, you see in a Roman arch or something,
Yes.
right?
And that was the other thing, he actually made his own forms to create these arches so perfectly.
Amazing. I mean, that's the kind of thing that normally you need training to build an
Yes,
arch, right?
exactly.
Like,
yes. That's not a simple thing to make a Roman arch. No. But he was able to figure out how to do that. And clearly they've been done correctly because they're holding up after all this time.
yeah.
And you can see more conventional furniture in here. So he did bring in a standard wood table and chairs. You don't see that too much around here. But once again, he was having visitors. So he's making a parlor room. For himself, a place to have visitors come in.
There's nobody around here that was doing this, right?
No, no one else around here was doing this.
Yeah.
And living on his own too. I mean, he was a bachelor, and so he could just make his home however he wanted it.
No, it seems like this house is really too big for a bachelor. Like
It is,
was
yes.
he hoping other people would move in, or
I
was he
think
creating a village?
I think at some point he did have the thought that he'd like to have a wife.
Yeah.
At some point, like I said, he had some girlfriends over the years, so I think there might have been a hope at one point. He was also very close with his brother's family. Giuseppe would bring his children down here on a regular basis. They would have dinner here together. So it wasn't just him by himself here. There was family, and he wanted space for that family.
So what percentage of the whole underground world we've seen so far?
So far, I've probably taken you through about 1.5 acres of it. So, well, today we have about 4 acres left. Yeah, but he had about 20 acres by the time he passed away. So it was quite extensive. Today, where Highway 99 is, today he had tunnels all the way out there. Yeah, some of the neighborhoods in this area do still have a room or two of his in their yard. So some of them do still exist. They're not connected to any of our tunnels anymore, but some of them are out there.
Should we keep going?
Yeah, I can show you more. It goes further underground.
Let's keep going.
Now watch your heads with this one. The ceiling slopes down really sharply.
So we're going down.
We're going further underground, yes.
Why?
Because of course, as you go further underground, it gets even cooler. So on those days when it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit up at ground level, you come down here and we have about a 25-degree drop. So it's very comfortable down here even in the summertime.
So 25 degrees Fahrenheit cooler down here.
Yes. And so at this point, we're about 22 feet below ground level.
But you don't feel like you're underground. You don't feel like you're further underground.
No, it doesn't. It's still so open. Yes. And you can feel a little more moisture in the air down here, but for the most part, yes, still very open. You can still feel a breeze come through.
So he was able to keep the earth from kind of tumbling in by just, or it's just the hardpan naturally does that, or he was bracing as he went?
It depends. So some areas it was just the hardpan naturally doing it, because sometimes he would find a piece of hardpan that he could just not get through. And so he took that as a sign that that is fine on its own. He did not need to alter it. But if he could break through it, then he saw that as an area that would need some extra structural support. So that's where he's putting in his stonework.
So he realized that maybe where he dug, this other level is what? How far down?
Between 10 and 12 feet, depending on where you are.
Okay, so he started with 10 and 12 feet down, and then he thought, if I go a little lower, I can get something cooler.
So this was later on.
Okay.
This is after he's been doing it for a few decades. But yes, he's realizing if he goes further underground, it's going to be cooler. And also, I think at this point, he just wanted to challenge himself. And I see that also in the tree that he planted down here. This tree at one time had 7 different types of citrus growing on it. So I really see this as he's reached the point in his working down here that he's trying to come up with something new and exciting for him to figure out if he can do.
You definitely see the layers. So you see
Yes.
clay, hardpan, hardpan's there, and then all that's hardpan.
This is all hardpan here.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you see how far down the hardpan
Yes.
goes. That's
It's significant, yeah.
12, 15 feet. The functionality of going this level is the sort of second floor underground,
Yes,
right?
yes.
-2.
Yes.
There, is just hottest point of summer, heat wave.
It's a place to come cool off. He's not making another home for himself down here. It's a single room. Functionality-wise, maybe it doesn't make the most sense, but it's a new challenge. You know, it's getting a tree with 7 different types of fruit to grow 22 feet underground and making sure that it's getting enough sunlight for that.
Navel orange, lemon, grapefruit, sweet lemon, Valencia orange, sour orange, and cedro.
This is the only one that had 7. Today there's just the 2 oranges.
Oh, because they're not all
we've
at once.
lost some of the grafts
Yeah.
over the years, so you can see where they used to be here. So today there's just Seville orange and Valencia orange on here.
Okay.
2 pretty amazing trees still alive.
It lasted a long time. We still have people that come to us and tell us that they were here as children and they've come back now, 40, 50 years later, and they remember that there were multiple fruits still on this tree. So it did last a long time with all 7 fruits.
Keep going.
Yeah, it keeps going. And in fact, this is another interesting thing he's created. So this is what he considered his tri-level aquarium. Now, we use the word aquarium because that's how Baldassare referred to it, but really up here we just have a little fish pond. So he would go fishing in the San Joaquin River, and so sometimes he would catch small fish that weren't worth keeping to eat, but he would bring them back here. He would set them in this little fish pond, and he made a room underneath it where he could sit down there and look up at the fish.
So he was able to keep fish alive down here. Obviously,
Yes.
now you have plastic fish, but
Yes.
at that point, he was able to keep these fish alive.
Now, I don't know how long, but
Yeah.
but he would bring back what he caught and he'd keep them in here.
Wow.
Yeah, just like a little pond.
He just kept experimenting.
And that's the thing. I feel like once he reached this point, he really is just like, let's see what else I can do. That's what I see him as doing.
Yeah.
So it just would have been able to look up and see the fish above him. And you can feel that temperature drop once again in here. I mean, this is a wonderful place to sit in the summertime.
You see that we're 2 floors below now because I can see.
Yeah, you can see.
I just saw it.
Yes.
Level above, it's really up there. So we're what, like 20?
This is about 25 feet below ground level now. So this is where he would eat his lunches in the summertime. And I think growing up in a Mediterranean environment, he probably loved that idea of being able to sit here and just relax. We do like to think that he embraced dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. So even though he's working hard, he's creating this home, we do see little pieces of his personality coming out where he's looking for places to relax and just enjoy his life. And I think this is a perfect example of that. This is just a place for him to come sit down, enjoy a meal, enjoy a glass of wine, look at the fish above him. I mean, it's a nice life.
What's the expression?
Dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing.
Not a lot of time in his life for that, it seems like.
I know. He definitely was busy.
But then I guess you have to find those moments.
Yes. And I like to think about that side of him because, it would be kind of sad to think if he was just work for 40 years. But I don't think he was that way. I think that he was definitely passionate about what he was creating, but he also took time to be with his family, to sit down here and just enjoy his life.
He's playing.
Yes, exactly. This is in the 1930s. He started in 1906. So at this point, he has reached that point of like, what else can I do?
So underground fish.
Yes.
Underground trees. Underground fireplaces.
Yes.
I mean,
And a wine cellar, because you need that. If you're going to have the whole underground area, you need a wine cellar.
Of course.
a little more.
Right? You can't leave that behind.
Exactly.
And you see vegetation everywhere,
Yes.
continually planted.
Yes. And that was a focus for him because at a certain point he was selling that fruit and making his living that way. So he did take space to make sure that he was growing those fruits.
And growing citrus in this kind of weather, in this area, that people can't,
Citrus is actually fairly common in this area if you get a good piece of land.
Okay.
That was the tricky thing for Baldassare, is citrus has very delicate roots, so it wouldn't be able to handle the hardpan.
Okay.
And he was unaware of the hardpan, so it was really trying to find an environment of getting past the hardpan for them.
I love it. Sour oranges.
Well, and the sour oranges were a really smart thing to plant because they're a very hardy tree. And so he would very often plant sour oranges and then go back and graft other citrus onto them.
This you can see just goes straight up. Does he prune?
No, actually they grow this way because of the exposure they have to the sun. So they just naturally grow straight up like
And
this.
they don't put out any limbs because why would you?
Exactly. There's no sun to get down here. You got to get up there.
They know.
Yeah, right. Nature knows.
That's a tall orange tree.
Yes. Yeah, so all of our citrus trees are shaped so differently from ones at ground level because of this skylight system. Instead of becoming more bushy down towards the bottom, they all need to grow up there, which actually makes it very convenient for harvesting because you can just walk at ground level and pick the fruit off like a bush.
I feel like I could move here.
Right? It's a nice way to live.
Yeah, isn't it? I'm surprised it didn't inspire more of his neighbors or more people.
I think just too much work. And it was unconventional. I mean, we have to think about other people living in this area at that time. They were not looking to do something like this.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? We don't want to change even if it's...
Yes, even if it makes sense.
Yeah.
So we consider this his chapel garden. And then we have his area of prayer over here.
So can we go with the biblical metaphor? Is this like an underground Garden of Eden or something like that?
You could. You could.
Well, you can feel the breeze in here.
Yes.
You feel the breeze coming through. So even without the Venturi effect,
It still comes through, yes. And a lot of the tunnels are set up in a way to push the air through them. And it really transports you. If you're very quiet, you can hear Highway City out there, but it takes you to another world. Lets you step back into his time, I think.
Oh, I see. Okay, then this is the chapel.
This is the chapel.
Okay.
Yep, so this is where he would have his prayers.
Then his brother took over? Or
His brother took over. So he never married. He actually was a very social man. He had a few girlfriends over the years. He never found the right lady to come marry him and live down here with him. So when he passed away, he had no direct descendants. But he was very close with his brother Giuseppe. And when Baldassare passed away, Giuseppe tried to preserve as much as he could of Baldassare's creation.
And then above?
So we have Baldassare's bell up here. One, it's the chapel, so you need to have a bell, but practical purpose as well. Baldassare used this as a doorbell. This area will turn you around quite a bit, but right up this passageway, there's a direct way to ground level again. So he made sure that his close friends and his family knew how to come down this passage and ring the bell, because you can imagine if they're coming over to see Baldassare, there's acres and acres of tunnels. It would be near impossible to find him. So they would come here and they would ring the bell and Baldassare would come meet them.
Can we go see the bell?
Yeah.
The front door?
Yeah.
A door?
Yeah.
There's no front door.
There's no front door. There's no front door, but yeah, it would just be right through this way.
Yeah. Oh, but we're still underground.
You're still underground, but see, if you come up here, there's Shaw Avenue.
Oh, so it's kind of a slope.
Yeah, so he would make sure that his friends and family, Shaw was here at the time. It was a one-lane road, but it was here.
Yeah.
So they would just come right on Shaw and just walk right down here, down that tunnel and ring the bell.
So here you see that there's some trees, but these are partially underground. I mean, they're,
Yes.
right? Does that help? It's getting to good soil?
It is getting to good soil, which is why they were planted here, but I will say these trees, they have had a harder time than the ones that are fully enclosed. You also notice that the trunks are very different with these trees. They're a lot thicker than the ones that you see that are fully enclosed.
Because they're trying to get...
More nutrients, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the doorbell was...
So they would walk down here,
Okay.
make a left, and then there's that big doorbell in the chapel. So there would be a rope hanging down.
There's not a rope coming out here to pull it.
No.
Like it was open.
Yes, this was completely open. He had no fences. So they would just walk right in, make a left, and go ring the bell.
The same way before modern communications, if a town, if there was some trouble, somebody would go run
Exactly.
to the church and
ring the bell.
So
Exactly.
it's the same model
Yes.
coming from the old world.
Which you can see a lot. You know, he's taking this knowledge he has from his home country and incorporating it here.
Is that right? Yes.
Yeah.
And even that way of sort of living amongst the orchard, that
Yes.
feeling of like it's so much more beautiful down in here than
Yes.
what we see out on the street.
Exactly.
Like, this is,
Yeah, you're living right in nature.
yeah. In a place that's kind of dry and hot and
Yes.
and you know, there's not forests around here.
Exactly.
Some weird little spots. What is that, more?
It's more. It just keeps going and going. So eventually Baldassare got the inspiration of turning this into a day resort. This wasn't something that he ever ended up opening up as a fully functioning business, but that was part of his inspiration of continuing to go, was he wanted to make courtyards where people could come underground, they could escape the heat, and they would be able to sit and just enjoy a glass of wine, enjoy some fruit right off of the tree. So this area that we're in right now, eventually he wanted it to be a car tunnel because he knew that if he was going to have a resort, he needed a way to get people to bring their cars underground. And so this tunnel here was intended to be part of a valet service for the resort.
So you can see that it wasn't finished.
So he had a lot of big ideas. Unfortunately, he did have an untimely death. He was only 67 when he passed away. He developed a hernia, which I think is not too surprising considering how many years of hard labor he had. But he went to have surgery on it and it was successful, but he got pneumonia while he was in the hospital. And so the pneumonia is actually what took his life. So he had lots of plans for what he wanted to do with it. And I think if he had had another 30 years to work down here, he probably still would have had big plans. You know, I think he would have kept going and going as long as he could.
There was a lot of foresight too. We're thinking about cars, what, in the 30s?
Yeah, in the 20s, he was starting this area. He had a car, so I think he just had in his mind that that's the way of the future and people are going to be having them, so we need a place to get them down here.
The mules.
Yes, so he actually had several different farm animals, 2 mules, and he also had a cow, he had pigs, he had chickens. He kept all of them up at ground level.
Okay.
Some people, they'll come out here and visit us and say, well, why did they have to be in the heat? But a big focus for Baldassare was that the air would be very fresh down here. And of course, when you start bringing farm animals underground, that's not going to keep the air quite so fresh. So they had structures just like other animals would have had in the area. But this area specifically, he did use those 2 mules to create because he would hook them up to his Fresno scraper. So that would be for the larger tunnels like this. Watch your step here. It goes down pretty steeply.
Thank you. Yeah, I know.
And let your eyes adjust a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we come out here and we're right back in that car tunnel.
Oh. So this is big enough for cars. I don't think we've been
Cars of the time. Cars of the time. Yes. I mean, it's definitely meant for Model A's, Model T's, narrow and tall. Most of our cars would not do very well in this car tunnel. And I was mentioning the Fresno scraper before that he'd hook up to his mules. His Fresno scraper is actually in here. So the Fresno scraper was invented in Fresno, but this is the first piece of farming equipment where people were able to excavate more than 1 shovelful at a time. So you would hook 1 or 2 mules up to that and just drag it along.
So this is how he was able to get a lot of dirt out of here.
Oh, yes.
Just with the animals and then
Scraping it along the ground. And so that would be used for the big projects like the car tunnel. Now for the smaller spaces, something like that is not going to work. But something large like this, you can excavate a lot more with that.
Yeah.
What really stands out with Baldassare is he's doing this on his own. There are other underground places, but very often they're done by a team of people. This is being done by himself.
This is a solo place.
Yes.
Wow. It's like his own like Moby Dick, like
Yes.
you know, his own.
Yeah, because this you would almost think of these modern tunneling devices.
You would think so.
This was all by
This
hand.
is done by hand.
All of
This is done by hand. All of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he just scraped it and took it out.
Yes. And then it probably would have gone right up that way because that starts to head up to ground level. So we would have taken it right up there and found a way to repurpose it.
Right, it keeps going. Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, because here it's just kind of semi-underground.
Yes, but you can feel that temperature change coming here. It's quite a bit warmer in this spot.
It is.
But once again, this is more for the cars, so he's probably not quite as focused on temperature-wise and more focused on keeping the air fresh.
And then he just kept going, so he was just going to keep digging if he
So,
longer.
I think so.
Yeah.
So this area actually heads up to ground level, and that's where he was planning to have a parking lot for the day resort.
Okay.
So the idea was the cars would drive all the way back there, and he had a space for a parking lot.
And is that a chimney?
That's a chimney to our ballroom, which was the final project he was working on before he passed away. I do believe that if he had had more years, he would have just kept going. But the ballroom was what he was working on before he went to have that surgery on the hernia. And the ballroom was also for that resort idea. He wanted to be able to have a space where people could have weddings and parties. It's currently under restoration, and he didn't finish it, so you're going to notice it looks quite a bit different than the other areas you've seen.
Oh my gosh. If he was doing this kind of modern...
So he started it. He excavated the room itself. So that alone is a huge feat, 3,500 square feet that he excavated. And all of this he excavated. And if you look around the room, you'll see some of his stonework. So he started the stonework. He passed away before he was able to finish it. So this room just sat here until Giuseppe was able to take over this piece of land, and then it was finished by Giuseppe and his family. Yeah, these are Baldassare's tools up here, and you'll see if you look at the shovels. I mean, I'm sure he went through many of them over the years.
Oh wow, just standard shovels.
Just standard shovels, standard pickaxes.
So the pickaxe was probably really important then.
Oh, yes,
for, like,
yes.
getting through a lot of that.
That was huge because most people use dynamite to get through hardpan. Baldassare didn't want to use dynamite for 2 reasons. One, he wanted to reuse the stone. So if you blast it out, you're not going to get usable stone. But 2, once he started creating, he didn't want to affect the rest of his structures. So he's doing it by hand.
And then he would just put things into these wheelbarrows?
Mm-hmm. He'd put things in the wheelbarrows and haul the wheelbarrows up to ground level. Once he started making friends in the community, he would accept help with pushing the wheelbarrows up to ground level because that's one of those laborious tasks that he didn't necessarily need to be doing that. And living in this area through times like the Great Depression, he very often would try to help other families in the community by giving them work to do, and then he could pay them with fruit that he was growing or other food that he was creating here.
So all we see here, there is some planting. Like, so somebody was able to plant.
Yes, so this was actually done in the 1940s.
Okay.
And this is here because of all the excavation that he did underground. Once he got past the hardpan, he was able to find a good soil that he could use for planting, and he moved it up here and built the topsoil up so much that eventually he planted these. So these are his trees. They're much younger than the ones underground that were planted in the early 1900s, but they are his.
Okay. And this right here was his original house?
No, this is actually from a World War II airfield.
Oh.
Yes, so history later down the line. So eventually his brother ended up taking it over after Baldassare passed away, and there were a few areas that needed to be finished off. At this same time, we had a World War II airfield called Hammer Airfield. They were auctioning off the buildings. His brother bought some of the buildings to finish off some of the areas Baldassare had been working on.
So there is a little bit above ground.
A little bit.
And it just happens to be an old World War II airfield.
Just happens to be.
Hangar.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that something significant?
Oh, yes. So this is one of those arch forms I was telling you about that he would create. He would just create them with parts that he would find, scrap metal, and then prop them up and build the arch around it.
That's
After Baldassare passed away, land was sold off by family over the years, and as you can see, the city has moved in on us, so we have preserved what we can.
Yeah, you were mentioning where was the one?
So there's a rumor that one of his rooms is on the property where the Carl's Jr. is today.
Okay.
And then as we get a little closer to our property, there's some hotels. On the other side of the hotels, there's a small neighborhood.
Okay.
And those we do know, some of the houses have a room or two of his in their yards. And they just cover them up with boards. They don't use them. They just have boards over them.
And none of it has caved in or...
No, we've actually never dealt with any collapses. That was Baldassare's well.
A well underground actually makes sense.
Right, well, yeah, because you're excavating anyway. So from this point, it's about 10 feet below ground level, and then it's excavated another 40 feet down.
Oh.
So at that point, that was enough for this to be a functional well for him. And you're right by his home, so that's a convenient place to have your water well, right? You just go over and get your water.
We've been in a lot of cave homes that feel like caves, but this doesn't feel like you never forget where the light is. Light and air, and it feels really,
More than a home, because of the amount of uses you find around here, it's almost like a little village.
Yes.
It feels more than a home. It's
Yes.
gardens.
Yes.
A chapel. Place to cook, a place to sleep, a place to hang out with your family.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing with Baldassare is he was very social. He had a heart for people. He wanted to share this with people. And in fact, on Sundays, he welcomed visitors to come see him, and he would just walk them around and show them what he was creating. So this was not intended to be something where he's just sequestering himself alone underground. He wanted to share it with others. This is one of the areas he brought in a strawberry tree to attract birds. So this was an area that he was hoping to have visitors come and relax.
This must be a really old one, right? It looks old.
The grapevine, yes. Yeah, the grapevine was planted very early on in the early 1900s, over 100 years old.
That's a vine.
Crazy.
And it still produces grapes. And this is one of his grafted trees. So you'll see both oranges and lemons growing up here. He did like experimenting with grafting. We used to have quite a few more grafted trees, but over the years, some of them have just lost their grafts.
Because he wanted to be able to have lots of variety.
Exactly, because that's the best way to get, more fruit in the same space. Just graft them onto the same tree.
It's really dreamy. I mean, to have like these trees down here, and you can just pop a fruit in your mouth. You're underground. It's cool. It's
a lovely way to live. When you really put yourself in his shoes, yes, he's working hard to create this, but doesn't that bring so much more value to it, that he's creating the home that he wants for himself?
And he didn't really see any limits, it seems like.
I don't think so. I think once he figured it out, the only limitation was his own abilities. You know, he had 80 acres to work within. This is not a time where he had to get permits to create these things. I mean, he could just wake up one morning and go and create an idea.
He was getting a lot from the land he had bought by mistake. But in the end, that turned out to be like an opportunity for exploration,
Yes.
right?
Exactly. And we kind of see it as he took the lemons that life gave him and he made limoncello. He made something just very different and creative and very unique in a way that he never saw his life going this way. But, you know, if things had worked out well, where he had gotten this good piece of land and he had grown his citrus, we wouldn't be here today. It would just be more of Highway City. And instead, he created this thing that we have, this legacy of people still coming today to hear about him. His nephew Rick used to say that he wasn't limited by conventional wisdom. Many people would have been faced with this obstacle and would have thought, well, I'm done. I'm just gonna have to work as a laborer the rest of my life. And he was not that type of person. He was someone who thought about it and have found a unique way to overcome that challenge.
Do you need to tell people, especially